The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Lincoln West High School in Detroit, Michigan, where broken dreams seemed to collect like autumn leaves in forgotten corners. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her rearview mirror one last time, studying the imposing brick building that would be her battlefield for the next few weeks. At 32, she carried herself with the precise posture of someone who had spent years following orders and giving them in equal measure. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her gray blazer concealed the lean muscle that came from 8 years as a Marine, Corps combat instructor, and 3 more as a professional mixed martial arts fighter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had never planned to become a teacher. 6 months ago, she was ranked 4th in the women's lightweight division, preparing for what could have been her title shot. Then came the injury during training, a torn ACL that required surgery and months of rehabilitation. The medical bills piled up faster than her savings could handle, and her fighting career was placed on indefinite hold. When her sister Emma mentioned the desperate need for substitute teachers at inner-city schools, Sarah saw it as a temporary solution to her financial problems. Nothing more than a way to pay the bills while she recovered. Emma worked as a guidance counselor at Lincoln West, and she had painted a picture of a school struggling against overwhelming odds. Budget cuts had eliminated half the teaching positions, leaving classrooms overcrowded and understaffed. The remaining teachers were burned out, many leaving mid-semester without notice. It was the kind of place where hope went to die, Emma had sighed. But someone still needed to show up and try. Sarah grabbed her leather messenger bag from the passenger seat and stepped out of her used Honda Civic. The parking lot was a minefield of potholes and broken glass, with graffiti covering every available surface. Students were already gathering in small clusters, their voices carrying a mixture of bravado and exhaustion that she recognized from her own tough childhood in Boston's South End. The main office was a cramped space behind bulletproof glass, where Principal Dorothy Hawkins waited with a stack of paperwork and a weary expression. Hawkins was a woman in her 50s who had clearly fought her own battles in the education system, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "You must be Sarah Mitchell," Hawkins sighed, buzzing her through the security door. "I have to say, I was surprised when Emma recommended you. Most substitutes don't last a week here, and the ones who do usually have education backgrounds." Sarah shook the principal's hand firmly. "I might not have classroom experience, but I know how to handle difficult situations. Sometimes that's more valuable than a teaching degree." Hawkins studied her carefully. "The position you're taking belongs to Mrs. Rodriguez. She taught junior English until 3 weeks ago when she decided she'd had enough. The class you'll be dealing with has a particular reputation, and I want to be upfront about what you're walking into." She handed Sarah a manila folder thick with incident reports. As Sarah flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged: disrupted classes, verbal abuse toward teachers, property damage, and a consistent group of names appearing in every report. At the center of it all was Marcus "Tank" Williams, a 17-year-old, who had been held back twice and seemed to view intimidation as an art form. "Tank runs with a crew called the Rebels," Hawkins explained. "They're not technically a gang, but they might as well be. They've made it their mission to drive out any teacher who tries to establish authority in that classroom. They use psychological warfare, verbal harassment, sexual intimidation, destruction of personal property. They know exactly how to push buttons without crossing legal lines." Sarah closed the folder, her jaw tightening slightly. "What kind of support do teachers get when this happens?" "That's the problem," Hawkins admitted. "Our security guard is 68 years old and mostly deaf. The school board ties our hands with policies about student rights and due process. By the time we can build a case for suspension or expulsion, most teachers have already quit. Tank's father is also a local contractor who's done work for the district, so he knows how to work the system. The bell rang, signaling the start of the first period. Hawkins walked Sarah through the hallways, pointing out emergency exits and the locations of the few working security cameras. The corridors were a maze of peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, with lockers that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1980s. "Your classroom is 218, Hawkins said as they climbed a narrow staircase. "The previous teacher left behind some materials, but I'd recommend keeping your personal belongings locked up. These kids have a talent for making things disappear." Room 218 was on the second floor, overlooking the school's neglected courtyard. The desks were arranged in traditional rows, though several showed signs of graffiti and damage. A whiteboard at the front of the room had permanent marker stains that no amount of cleaning could remove. Sarah set her bag down on the teacher's desk and surveyed her new domain. The first few periods passed without major incident. Sarah taught basic grammar and vocabulary to underclassmen who seemed more confused than hostile. She began to wonder if Emma and Principal Hawkins had been exaggerating the challenges she would face. Then the fifth period arrived. Tank Williams entered the classroom like he owned it, his 6-foot frame carrying the kind of muscle that came from working construction jobs since he was 14. Behind him came his crew, Jason Diesel Murphy, whose neck tattoos told the story of multiple juvenile detention stays, Chloe Banks, whose hostile stare could melt steel, and Marcus Little Mac Thompson, Tank's younger cousin who tried to compensate for his small size with excessive aggression. They took seats in the back corner, making no effort to hide their disdain for the setup. Tank leaned back in his chair, his legs stretched into the aisle, while Diesel pulled out his phone and began playing music without headphones. Chloe filed her nails with exaggerated indifference, and Little Mac started drumming on his desk with pencils. Sarah had faced intimidation before, in the Marines, in the fighting ring, and on the streets of her youth. But this was different. These weren't adults who played by established rules of engagement. These were teenagers who had learned that chaos was their greatest weapon, and they wielded it with surgical precision. "Good afternoon, class," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority she had developed over years of commanding respect in hostile environments. "I'm Miss Mitchell, and I'll be your English teacher for the remainder of the semester." Tank let out a slow whistle. "Miss Mitchell," he drawled, emphasizing the title mockingly. "You're definitely prettier than the last teacher. How long are you planning to stick around?" A few students snickered, but Sarah noticed that most of the class seemed uncomfortable with Tank's immediate challenge. She made a mental note of the dynamics at play. Tank was performing for his crew, but the majority of students appeared to be caught in the crossfire of his need to establish dominance. "I'm here to teach English," Sarah replied evenly. "If you're here to learn, we'll get along fine." Diesel looked up from his phone. "What if we're not here to learn? What if we're just here because the law says we have to be?" Sarah walked closer to his desk, her movements controlled and deliberate. "Then you'll sit quietly while others learn, or you'll find yourself having a conversation with Principal Hawkins." "Ooh, scary," Chloe said with fake trembling. "The new teacher's going to send us to the principal. I'm sure that'll work out great for you." The challenge was unmistakable, and Sarah realized this was a test. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would determine whether she would survive in this classroom or become another casualty in the war between education and chaos. She moved to the front of the room and picked up a marker. "Today we're going to talk about power," she said, writing the word on the whiteboard. "Specifically, the difference between real power and the illusion of power." Tank leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah turned to face the class, her expression serious but not hostile. "Real power comes from competence, respect, and the ability to create positive change. The illusion of power comes from fear, intimidation, and the temporary satisfaction of tearing others down. Sounds like teacher bullshit to me, Little Mac muttered. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But here's what I know about power from experience. The people who talk about it the most usually have the least of it. The ones who really have it don't need to prove it to anyone. The room fell silent. Tank's eyes narrowed as he processed the implied challenge in her words. Sarah had just thrown down a gauntlet, and everyone in the room knew it. The battle lines were drawn. Sarah Mitchell, former Marine and professional fighter, stood on one side. Tank Williams and his crew of classroom terrorists stood on the other. Between them sat 23 other students whose education hung in the balance. What none of them knew was that Sarah's military record included 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where she had learned that the most dangerous battles were often fought not with weapons, but with will. Her fighting career had taught her that victory belonged to whoever could endure the most punishment while still standing. As the bell rang to end the 5th period, Tank stood slowly and walked toward the door. As he passed Sarah's desk, he leaned in close enough that only she could hear. "You think you're tough, teacher? We'll see about that. This is our house, and you're just visiting." Sarah met his stare without flinching. "I guess we'll find out who's right." The war for room 218 had officially begun. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Lincoln West an hour before classes began. She had spent the previous evening researching each member of Tank's crew, using social media and public records to understand what she was dealing with. Military training had taught her that knowledge was the foundation of any successful operation, and this classroom was no different from a battlefield. Principal Hawkins was already in her office, nursing a cup of coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "You're here early," she observed as Sarah knocked on the doorframe. "I wanted to review the student files more thoroughly," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from Hawkins' desk. "Tell me about Tank Williams' background. What made him?" "This way." Hawkins pulled out a thick manila folder. "Marcus has been in the system since he was 12. Father walked out when he was 8. Mother works 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. He's been the man of the house since middle school, responsible for his 2 younger siblings. The tough guy act isn't entirely an act. He's had to be the protector and provider for his family." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah studied Tank's academic record. Despite his disruptive behavior, his test scores showed above average intelligence. "He's capable of doing the work. That's what makes it so frustrating," Hawkins agreed. "Tank could graduate and probably succeed in college if he wanted to. But he's built his entire identity around being the alpha male of this school. Backing down from a teacher, especially a female teacher, would threaten everything he thinks he is." "What about his crew?" "Jason Murphy, Diesel, has been arrested twice for assault. His family has connections to some unsavory people in the neighborhood, which gives him street credibility. Chloe Banks is actually the smartest one in the group. Her mother is a nurse. Father's a mechanic, solid middle-class family. She hangs with Tank because she's bored and likes the drama. And the little one, Marcus Thompson, Little Mac. Tank's cousin lives with them because his own parents are dealing with addiction issues. He worships Tank and will do anything to prove himself worthy of the crew. He's the most dangerous one because he has the most to prove." Sarah absorbed this information, already formulating a strategy. Understanding the enemy was half the battle, but she needed to see them in action before making her move. The morning classes proceeded smoothly until 4th period, when she encountered Diesel in the hallway. He was leaning against a row of lockers, blocking the path of a smaller freshman who was clearly trying to retrieve books for his next class. "Problem here?" Sarah asked, approaching the situation. Diesel straightened up, his 6'2" frame. Impressive but not intimidating to someone who had faced enemy combatants. "No problem, Ms. Mitchell. Just having a friendly conversation with my buddy Tyler here." Tyler, a thin kid with thick glasses, looked terrified. Sarah could see the classic signs of bullying. The freshman was pressed against his locker, books clutched to his chest like a shield. "Tyler, don't you have class to get to?" Sarah asked gently. The boy nodded quickly and tried to move past Diesel, who shifted slightly to block his path. It was a subtle movement, but Sarah caught it. "Diesel," she said, her voice carrying a note of authority that made several nearby students stop and listen. "Step aside." "I'm not doing anything wrong," he replied with a smirk. "This is a public hallway. I have a right to stand here." Sarah moved closer, positioning herself between Diesel and Tyler. "You have a right to stand in the hallway. You don't have a right to intimidate other students. Move." For a moment, Diesel seemed ready to escalate the confrontation. Then he noticed the small crowd that had gathered to watch. Whatever reputation he was trying to maintain wouldn't be served by backing down publicly, but neither would it be helped by getting suspended for defying a teacher in front of witnesses. "Whatever," he muttered, stepping aside with exaggerated casualness. "See you around, Tyler." Tyler hurried away, and the crowd dispersed. Sarah made a mental note. Diesel was the muscle of the operation, but he wasn't stupid. He understood the consequences and could be controlled through strategic pressure. Fifth period arrived like a gathering storm. Tank and his crew entered room 218 with the confidence of generals surveying conquered territory. But Sarah noticed subtle changes in their formation. Chloe took a seat closer to the front, and little Mac seemed more agitated than usual. "Good afternoon," Sarah began, writing vocabulary words on the whiteboard. "Today we're studying context clues and how to determine meaning from surrounding information." "Boring," Chloe announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Sarah continued writing without acknowledging the comment. This was another test. They wanted to see if they could derail her lesson through constant interruption. "Who can tell me what a context clue is?" she asked, turning to face the class. Several hands went up, surprising both Sarah and Tank's crew. Apparently, when the classroom terrorists weren't actively disrupting things, other students were willing to participate. "Maria?" Sarah called on a quiet girl in the third row. "It's when you figure out what a word means by looking at the other words around it," Maria answered softly. "Excellent. Can you give me an example?" Before Maria could respond, little Mac made a loud kissing sound. "Teacher's pet," he sang in a high-pitched voice. The room tension shifted immediately. Maria's face flushed red, and she looked down at her desk. Sarah felt a flash of anger, but kept her expression neutral. This was about more than classroom management. It was about protecting students who wanted to learn from those who preferred. "Chaos. Marcus," Sarah said, using little Mac's real name instead of his nickname. "You seem to have something to say. Would you like to share with the class?" Little Mac was caught off guard by being called out directly. "I wasn't doing nothing." "You made a sound during Maria's answer. Since you're so eager to participate, why don't you give us your own example of a context clue?" "I don't know," he mumbled, suddenly less confident. "That's okay," Sarah said. "Learning requires effort, and effort requires courage. Some people have it, some people don't." It was a calculated insult, delivered with a teacher's tone but carrying the sting of a challenge. Little Mac's face darkened, and Tank straightened in his seat. "You calling him a coward?" Tank asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Sarah met his stare. "I'm saying that learning takes courage, and disrupting other people's education takes none. Everyone in this room gets to decide which category they fall into." "Maybe you should decide whether you want to keep this job," Diesel said from the back corner. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah filed it away for future reference while continuing the lesson. "Let's look at this sentence. The students. Belligerent behavior disrupted the entire class. Can anyone tell me what belligerent means based on the context? A few hands went up, including Maria's again. But before Sarah could call on anyone, Chloe stood up and walked to the pencil sharpener, making as much noise as possible. She took her time, grinding the pencil far longer than necessary, the sound piercing through the classroom like nails on a chalkboard. Sarah waited. The class watched. The power struggle played out in silence, broken only by the mechanical grinding. Finally, Chloe returned to her seat with exaggerated satisfaction. "Sorry," she said with false sweetness. "My pencil was really dull." "No problem," Sarah replied calmly. "Dull tools make everything harder. That's why sharp minds are so valuable." Several students snickered at the subtle comeback, and Chloe's eyes flashed with anger. Sarah had just won a small victory, but she knew it would come with a price. The rest of the period passed in tense silence. Tank's crew had clearly decided to regroup and plan their next move rather than continue with random disruptions. When the bell rang, they filed out without the usual dramatic exit. Sarah was packing up her materials when Maria approached her desk hesitantly. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for, standing up for me." "You don't need to thank me for doing my job, Maria, but I want you to know that you belong in this classroom as much as anyone else. It's just ... Most teachers don't bother. They figure it's easier to let Tank and his friends do whatever they want than to fight them." "I'm not most teachers," Sarah said simply. After Maria left, Sarah remained in the empty classroom, analyzing the day's encounters. Tank's crew was testing her boundaries systematically, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The disruption tactics were designed to wear down her patience and make her either lose her temper or give up control of the classroom. But Sarah had faced psychological warfare before. In Afghanistan, enemy combatants had used similar tactics: probe for weaknesses, escalate slowly, wait for the breaking point. The key was maintaining discipline while demonstrating that escalation would be met with appropriate response. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How was your first week? Heard through the grapevine that you're having some challenges with the Williams boy." Sarah typed back, "Nothing I can't handle. These kids think they're tough, but they've never met a real fighter." As she walked to her car, Sarah noticed Diesel and Little Mac lurking near the parking lot entrance. They were trying to look casual, but their positioning was clearly designed to intercept her. She continued walking normally, her hands sliding into her jacket pocket, where she kept her keys positioned between her fingers, an old habit from her days walking alone through dangerous neighborhoods. "Ms. Mitchell," Diesel called out as she approached her car. "Got a minute? Make it quick," she replied, not breaking stride. "Just wanted to give you some friendly advice," Little Mac said, stepping closer. "The school has its own way of doing things. Teachers who try to change that usually don't last long." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face them fully. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Diesel said. "Tank likes you, thinks you have spirit. But respect is earned around here, and you haven't earned it yet." "How does one earn respect in your system?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about their mindset. "You mind your business, teach your lessons, and don't try to be a hero," Little Mac explained. "Do that, and we'll make sure the other students behave themselves." It was a protection racket disguised as helpful advice. Sarah almost smiled at the transparency of it. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, unlocking her car door. "Is there anything else?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah studied Tank's academic record. Despite his disruptive behavior, his test scores showed above average intelligence. "He's capable of doing the work. That's what makes it so frustrating," Hawkins agreed. "Tank could graduate and probably succeed in college if he wanted to. But he's built his entire identity around being the Alpha male of this school. Backing down from a teacher, especially a female teacher, would threaten everything he thinks he is. What about his crew? Jason Murphy, Diesel, has been arrested twice for assault. His family has connections to some unsavory people in the neighborhood, which gives him street credibility. Chloe Banks is actually the smartest one in the group. Her mother is a nurse. Father's a mechanic, solid middle-class family. She hangs with Tank because she's bored and likes the drama. And the little one. Marcus Thompson, Little Mac. Tank's cousin lives with them because his own parents are dealing with addiction issues. He worships Tank and will do anything to prove himself worthy of the crew. He's the most dangerous one because he has the most to prove. Sarah absorbed this information, already formulating a strategy. Understanding the enemy was half the battle, but she needed to see them in action before making her move. The morning classes proceeded smoothly until fourth period, when she encountered Diesel in the hallway. He was leaning against a row of lockers, blocking the path of a smaller freshman who was clearly trying to retrieve books for his next class. Problem here? Sarah asked, approaching the situation. Diesel straightened up, his 6'2" frame. Impressive but not intimidating to someone who had faced enemy combatants. No problem, Ms. Mitchell. Just having a friendly conversation with my buddy Tyler here. Tyler, a thin kid with thick glasses, looked terrified. Sarah could see the classic signs of bullying. The freshman was pressed against his locker, books clutched to his chest like a shield. Tyler, don't you have class to get to? Sarah asked gently. The boy nodded quickly and tried to move past Diesel, who shifted slightly to block his path. It was a subtle movement, but Sarah caught it. Diesel, she said, her voice carrying a note of authority that made several nearby students stop and listen. Step aside. I'm not doing anything wrong, he replied with a smirk. This is a public hallway. I have a right to stand here. Sarah moved closer, positioning herself between Diesel and Tyler. You have a right to stand in the hallway. You don't have a right to intimidate other students. Move. For a moment, Diesel seemed ready to escalate the confrontation. Then he noticed the small crowd that had gathered to watch. Whatever reputation he was trying to maintain wouldn't be served by backing down publicly, but neither would it be helped by getting suspended for defying a teacher in front of witnesses. Whatever, he muttered, stepping aside with exaggerated casualness. See you around, Tyler. Tyler hurried away, and the crowd dispersed. Sarah made a mental note. Diesel was the muscle of the operation, but he wasn't stupid. He understood the consequences and could be controlled through strategic pressure. Fifth period arrived like a gathering storm. Tank and his crew entered room 218 with the confidence of generals surveying conquered territory. But Sarah noticed subtle changes in their formation. Chloe took a seat closer to the front, and little Mac seemed more agitated than usual. Good afternoon, Sarah began, writing vocabulary words on the whiteboard. Today we're studying context clues and how to determine meaning from surrounding information. Boring, Chloe announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Sarah continued writing without acknowledging the comment. This was another test. They wanted to see if they could derail her lesson through constant interruption. Who can tell me what a context clue is? She asked, turning to face the class. Several hands went up, surprising both Sarah and Tank's crew. Apparently, when the classroom terrorists weren't actively disrupting things, other students were willing to participate. Maria? Sarah called on a quiet girl in the third row. It's when you figure out what a word means by looking at the other words around it, Maria answered softly. Excellent. Can you give me an example? Before Maria could respond, little Mac made a loud kissing sound. Teacher's pet, he sang in a high-pitched voice. The room tension shifted immediately. Maria's face flushed red, and she looked down at her desk. Sarah felt a flash of anger, but kept her expression neutral. This was about more than classroom management. It was about protecting students who wanted to learn from those who preferred. Chaos. Marcus, Sarah said, using little Mac's real name instead of his nickname. You seem to have something to say. Would you like to share with the class? Little Mac was caught off guard by being called out directly. I wasn't doing nothing. You made a sound during Maria's answer. Since you're so eager to participate, why don't you give us your own example of a context clue? I don't know, he mumbled, suddenly less confident. That's okay, Sarah said. Learning requires effort, and effort requires courage. Some people have it, some people don't. It was a calculated insult, delivered with a teacher's tone but carrying the sting of a challenge. Little Mac's face darkened, and Tank straightened in his seat. You calling him a coward? Tank asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Sarah met his stare. I'm saying that learning takes courage, and disrupting other people's education takes none. Everyone in this room gets to decide which category they fall into. Maybe you should decide whether you want to keep this job, Diesel said from the back corner. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah filed it away for future reference while continuing the lesson. Let's look at this sentence. The students. Belligerent behavior disrupted the entire class. Can anyone tell me what belligerent means based on the context? A few hands went up, including Maria's again. But before Sarah could call on anyone, Chloe stood up and walked to the pencil sharpener, making as much noise as possible. She took her time, grinding the pencil far longer than necessary, the sound piercing through the classroom like nails on a chalkboard. Sarah waited. The class watched. The power struggle played out in silence, broken only by the mechanical grinding. Finally, Chloe returned to her seat with exaggerated satisfaction. Sorry, she said with false sweetness. My pencil was really dull. No problem. Sarah replied calmly. Dull tools make everything harder. That's why sharp minds are so valuable. Several students snickered at the subtle comeback, and Chloe's eyes flashed with anger. Sarah had just won a small victory, but she knew it would come with a price. The rest of the period passed in tense silence. Tank's crew had clearly decided to regroup and plan their next move rather than continue with random disruptions. When the bell rang, they filed out without the usual dramatic exit. Sarah was packing up her materials when Maria approached her desk hesitantly. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for, standing up for me. You don't need to thank me for doing my job, Maria, but I want you to know that you belong in this classroom as much as anyone else. It's just ... Most teachers don't bother. They figure it's easier to let Tank and his friends do whatever they want than to fight them. I'm not most teachers, Sarah said simply. After Maria left, Sarah remained in the empty classroom, analyzing the day's encounters. Tank's crew was testing her boundaries systematically, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The disruption tactics were designed to wear down her patience and make her either lose her temper or give up control of the classroom. But Sarah had faced psychological warfare before. In Afghanistan, enemy combatants had used similar tactics: probe for weaknesses, escalate slowly, wait for the breaking point. The key was maintaining discipline while demonstrating that escalation would be met with appropriate response. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How was your first week? Heard through the grapevine that you're having some challenges with the Williams boy. Sarah typed back, nothing I can't handle. These kids think they're tough, but they've never met a real fighter. As she walked to her car, Sarah noticed Diesel and Little Mac lurking near the parking lot entrance. They were trying to look casual, but their positioning was clearly designed to intercept her. She continued walking normally, her hands sliding into her jacket pocket, where she kept her keys positioned between her fingers, an old habit from her days walking alone through dangerous neighborhoods. Ms. Mitchell, Diesel called out as she approached her car. Got a minute? Make it quick, she replied, not breaking stride. Just wanted to give you some friendly advice. Little Mac said, stepping closer. The school has its own way of doing things. Teachers who try to change that usually don't last long. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face them fully. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Diesel said. Tank likes you, thinks you have spirit. But respect is earned around here, and you haven't earned it yet. How does one earn respect in your system? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about their mindset. You mind your business, teach your lessons, and don't try to be a hero, Little Mac explained. Do that, and we'll make sure the other students behave themselves. It was a protection racket disguised as helpful advice. Sarah almost smiled at the transparency of it. I'll keep that in mind, she said, unlocking her car door. Is there anything else? The two boys exchanged glances, apparently expecting more resistance to their offer. Just think about it, Diesel said finally. Some battles aren't worth fighting. As Sarah drove home, she reflected on the day's intelligence gathering. Tank's crew was more sophisticated than typical school bullies. They understood leverage, negotiation, and psychological pressure. But they were also predictable in their patterns and overconfident in their control. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But Sarah felt ready for whatever they had planned. The real war was just beginning. The second week began with an ominous calm that Sarah recognized from her military days, the quiet before a coordinated assault. Tank's crew had been absent from school Monday and Tuesday, which Principal Hawkins explained was part of their strategy. They're letting you get comfortable, Hawkins warned during their Wednesday morning meeting. Building up your confidence before they really strike. I've seen this pattern with 3 teachers before you. Sarah was reviewing lesson plans when her sister Emma knocked on the classroom door. Emma's usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by obvious concern. I heard some troubling rumors yesterday, Emma said, closing the door behind her. Some of the students are saying Tank's crew is planning something big for you. Something they're calling Operation Teacher Break. What kind of something? I don't have specifics, but there's talk about humiliation, recording it, and posting it online. They want to make an example out of you that will scare off any future substitutes. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. In the Marines, intelligence about enemy plans was invaluable. Who told you this? One of the freshman girls, Ashley Chun. She overheard Chloe talking to some other students in the bathroom. Apparently, they're planning to strike during the 5th period today. The warning gave Sarah time to prepare, but she wondered if it was also part of their psychological game. Keeping her on edge, wondering when and how they would attack, was itself a form of warfare. 4th period ended normally, and Sarah used the brief break to position herself strategically. She moved her desk so she had clear sight lines to all entrances and placed her phone where she could quickly start recording if needed. Years of combat training had taught her that preparation was the difference between victory and defeat. The 5th period bell rang, and Tank's crew entered with unusual energy. They were accompanied by several students Sarah didn't recognize. Older kids who clearly didn't belong in a junior English class. Tank carried himself with the swagger of a general leading troops into battle. Afternoon, Miss Mitchell, Tank said with false politeness. Hope you're ready for an interesting class today. I'm always ready for learning, Sarah replied, maintaining her position behind the desk while scanning the room. 12 unauthorized students had entered with Tank's crew, bringing the class size to nearly 40. It was a violation of fire safety codes and school policy, but Sarah realized that confronting it immediately would trigger whatever they had planned. Today we're going to learn about respect, Chloe announced from her seat, pulling out her phone and positioning it to record. Real respect, not fake teacher respect. Several other phones appeared around the room, all aimed at Sarah. This was coordinated. They planned to capture whatever humiliation they had planned and spread it across social media. The digital age had given bullies new weapons that previous generations couldn't imagine. Actually, Sarah said calmly, today we're studying persuasive writing techniques. The art of changing minds through logic rather than force. Little Mac laughed loudly. Yeah? Well, we got our own persuasive techniques, don't we, boys? The unauthorized students began moving around the room, positioning themselves near exits and creating an atmosphere of controlled chaos. Sarah recognized the tactic: surround the target, cut off escape routes, and build intimidation through numbers. Ms. Mitchell, Tank said, standing up slowly. We think you've been disrespecting our school culture. Making students feel bad about themselves. That's not very nice, is it? I think encouraging students to reach their potential is exactly what education should do, Sarah replied. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, maybe they should ask themselves why. See, that's the problem right there, Diesel said, also standing. You think you're better than us. Think you can come in here and change everything. The circle was tightening. Sarah counted exits, assessed threats, and ran through her options. She could call for security, but the elderly guard would be useless against this many teenagers. She could try to leave, but they would see that as victory, and it would establish their dominance permanently. Or she could use skills that these kids had never encountered before. You want to talk about respect? Sarah asked, stepping out from behind her desk. Let's have that conversation. Chloe perked up, sensing that the confrontation was about to escalate. Yeah, let's have that conversation. Why don't you tell us all about your respect for our community? Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through intimidation, Sarah said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. Real strength protects others. Fake strength preys on the vulnerable. You calling us fake? Little Max snarled, stepping closer. I'm saying that anyone who needs a dozen friends to face one teacher probably isn't as strong as they pretend to be. The insult hit its mark. Several of the unauthorized students looked uncomfortable, realizing they were being used as props in someone else's power play. Tank's eyes flashed with anger, but Sarah noticed something else, surprised that she was fighting back instead of cowering. Maybe we need to teach you a lesson about how things work around here, Tank said, moving toward her with purposeful steps. Sarah had faced this decision point before, in Afghanistan, when enemy combatants tested American resolve. In the fighting ring when opponents tried to intimidate her before matches. The moment when backing down seemed easier than standing on the ground, but backing down now would destroy any chance she had of helping the students who actually wanted to learn. Students like Maria, who deserved better than this circus. I'm listening, Sarah said, positioning herself in a combat stance that appeared casual, but provided maximum mobility. What lesson did you want to teach? Tank was now close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. Maybe we start by showing you what happens to teachers who don't know their place. He reached toward her shoulder, whether to push her or grab her blazer Sarah couldn't tell. But the moment his hand moved toward her, 8 years of Marine Corps training and 3 years of professional fighting experience took over. Sarah caught his wrist with her left hand, while simultaneously stepping back into the side, using Tank's own momentum to throw him off balance. The movement was so smooth and fast that for a moment, the room fell silent in shock. Tank stumbled forward, caught himself, and spun around with fury in his eyes. You just made a big mistake, lady. Did I? Sarah asked, still calm. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just assaulted a teacher in front of 30 witnesses with cameras recording. The weight of her words sank in around the room. Tank's crew had planned to provoke her into losing control, not the other way around. Now they were on video as the aggressors, while Sarah had defended herself with minimal force. Diesel started forward to support Tank, but Sarah held up a hand. I wouldn't, she said quietly. Ask yourselves if whatever respect you think you'll gain is worth the assault charges you'll definitely face. The unauthorized students began backing toward the exits, wanting no part of a situation that had escalated beyond teenage posturing into potential criminal territory. Tank's carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart. "This isn't over," Chloe said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Actually, it is," Sarah replied. "Because here's what's going to happen next. Everyone who doesn't belong in this class is going to leave. Everyone who does belong is going to sit down and participate in a lesson about persuasive writing. And anyone who doesn't like those options can explain their behavior to Principal Hawkins." The room cleared slowly. Tank's crew remained, but their energy had shifted from predatory confidence to defensive uncertainty. They had never encountered a teacher who could physically handle herself, and it had fundamentally changed the power dynamic. "Now," Sarah said, returning to the whiteboard as if nothing had happened, "persuasive writing relies on three main elements: ethos, pathos, and logos. Can anyone tell me what ethos means?" To her surprise, Maria raised her hand, then another student, and another, for the first time since Sarah had arrived at Lincoln West. Tank's crew sat silently while other students participated in an actual lesson. The psychological warfare had backfired, revealing them as bullies rather than the protective leaders they claimed to be. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Tank wouldn't accept this humiliation quietly, and his next move would be more calculated and potentially more dangerous. As the bell rang to end the fifth period, Tank approached her desk one last time. "You think you won something today?" "I think 30 kids learned about persuasive writing," Sarah replied. "Isn't that why we're all here?" Tank leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You have no idea what you just started. This was us being nice. Next time won't be." After the classroom emptied, Sarah sat down heavily in her chair. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the adrenaline crash beginning. She had won this battle, but Tank was right about one thing: she had definitely started something that wouldn't end in the classroom. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice moves today. But school ends at 3:30. What happens after that is a different game." Sarah stared at the message, recognizing it as the opening move in a more serious conflict. Tank's crew was escalating beyond school grounds, which meant the rules were about to change completely. She thought about her sister Emma, about Maria and the other students who deserved a chance to learn, about her own reasons for being here. Then she typed back a single word: "Bring it." The war for Lincoln West High School had just entered a new phase. Sarah's apartment that evening felt like a command bunker. She had spread student files across her kitchen table, mapping out connections between Tank's crew and other students, looking for patterns that might predict their next move. The anonymous text had shifted this from a classroom management problem to a personal safety issue. Her phone rang, displaying Emma's number. "I heard what happened today," Emma said without preamble. "Half the school is talking about how you handled Tank. The other half is worried about what he'll do next." "What are people saying?" "That depends on who you ask. The teachers are impressed but nervous. The students are split between thinking you're a hero and thinking you've made things worse for everyone." Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I didn't have a choice, Em. He was going to assault me on camera." "I know, and I'm proud of you." But Tank's father, Robert Williams, called the school board tonight. He's claiming you attacked his son and demanding your immediate termination. Based on what evidence? That's the interesting part. Apparently, none of the student recordings from today show you doing anything wrong. They all show Tank approaching you aggressively and you defending yourself. But Robert Williams has connections throughout the district. Sarah had researched Robert Williams that afternoon. Construction contractor, city council member for 8 years, and a man who understood how to work the system. His company had built 3 schools in the district and maintained lucrative maintenance contracts. There's something else, Emma continued. One of my students, Kevin Park, asked to speak with me privately today. He said Tank's crew has been planning something they call Phase 2, whatever that means. Did he give you any details? Only that it involves Tank's older brother, Vincent. Apparently, Vincent just got out of county lockup last month and has some friends who owe him favors. Vincent Williams was a name Sarah hadn't encountered in her research. She made a note to investigate him further. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Sarah's classroom. Detective Angela Reeves from the Detroit Police Department's School Resource Unit knocked on her door during the planning period. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Reeves. I'd like to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention. Detective Reeves was a woman in her 40s with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of human behavior. She took a seat across from Sarah's desk and pulled out a small notebook. We received a complaint last night about an incident involving you and a student named Marcus Williams. The complainant alleged that you used excessive force against a minor. The incident was recorded by multiple students, Sarah said. I defended myself when Marcus attempted to put his hands on me. I've seen the recordings, Detective Reeves said with a slight smile. Which is why I'm here for a different reason. Those videos also show a coordinated intimidation effort involving students who don't belong in your class. That suggests organized harassment, which crosses into criminal territory. Sarah felt a surge of relief. Finally, an adult in authority who understood what was really happening. What I need from you, Detective Reeves continued, is documentation. Every incident, every threat, every disruption. If this escalated further, I want a paper trail that shows the pattern of behavior. It's already escalating, Sarah said, showing the detective the anonymous text from the previous day. Detective Reeves photographed the message and made notes. Have you received any other communications? Not yet, but I expect more. This isn't random teenage rebellion. It's organized psychological warfare designed to drive me out of the school. Why do you think they're targeting you specifically? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because I'm not intimidated by them. Every other teacher has either quit or made accommodations that let them control the classroom. I represent a threat to their entire power structure. Detective Reeves closed her notebook. Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to give you my direct number. If anything happens, and I mean anything, you call me immediately. Don't wait for school administration. Or try to handle it yourself. After the detective left, Sarah felt both validated and more concerned. Official police involvement meant the situation was being taken seriously, but it also meant Tank's crew would likely view her as an even greater threat. Fifth period arrived with a different energy than previous days. Tank and his crew entered the classroom accompanied by someone Sarah didn't recognize. A young man in his early 20s with the same facial features as Tank, but harder eyes and prison tattoos covering his forearms. Vincent Williams had come to school. Ms. Mitchell, Tank said with exaggerated politeness. I'd like you to meet my brother Vincent. He wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Vincent said nothing, but his presence filled the room with menace. Other students shifted nervously in their seats, recognizing the escalation this represented. Sarah maintained her composure while quickly assessing the new threat. Vincent doesn't attend this school, Sarah said calmly. He needs to leave. Actually, Vincent spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who had spent time in correctional facilities. I'm here as a concerned family member, making sure my little brother is getting the education he deserves. The statement was carefully worded to avoid direct threats while making his intentions clear. Sarah recognized the tactics of someone who had learned to navigate the legal system. Family members who want to observe classes need to check in with the main office and receive permission from the principal, Sarah replied. School policy. Policies are for people who follow rules, Chloe said with renewed confidence. Vincent's presence had reinvigorated Tank's crew. "Everyone follows rules," Sarah said. "The only question is whether they follow them voluntarily or have them enforced." Vincent laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You got some fight in you, teacher. I can respect that. But you're playing in a league you don't understand." "What league is that?" "The real world, where actions have consequences and protection comes with a price." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Vincent was offering the same protection racket his brother had suggested, but with the implicit backing of street-level violence. "I've lived in the real world," Sarah replied. "Spent 8 years in places where consequences were measured in lives, not grades." For the first time, Vincent looked genuinely curious. "Military?" "Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." The information shifted something in Vincent's expression. Criminal or not, he understood military service carried its own form of respect. But Tank immediately spoke up, unwilling to let his brother show any deference to their target. "Military doesn't mean nothing here," Tank said loudly. "This is our territory." Vincent's eyes flashed with annoyance at his brother's interruption, and Sarah filed away that family dynamic for future reference. There was tension between the brothers, which could potentially be exploited. "Your territory," Sarah repeated. Interesting way to describe a public school funded by taxpayers and dedicated to education. "Education," Diesel laughed. "You really think that's what happens here?" "I think education happens when students are given the opportunity to learn without intimidation," Sarah said. "And I think some people are threatened by that possibility." Little Max stood up abruptly. "You think you're so smart with your military stories and your fancy words, but you don't know what you're dealing with. Enlighten me." "We run this school. Every teacher knows it. Every student knows it. Even the principal knows it. You're just too stupid to accept reality." Sarah walked closer to Little Mac, noticing how he instinctively stepped back despite his aggressive words. "Reality is that you're 17 years old, failing English, and your biggest accomplishment is frightening teachers into quitting. That's not power, that's pathetic." The insult hit its target. Little Mac's face flushed red, and he looked to Tank for support. But Tank was watching Vincent, trying to gauge his brother's reaction to the teacher who refused to show fear. "You know what?" Vincent said finally. "I like you, Miss Mitchell. You got backbone, but a backbone without brains gets people hurt." He stood and walked toward the door, his message delivered. Tank's crew followed like a pack of wolves trailing there. Alpha, leaving Sarah alone with the students who actually belonged in the class. For the remainder of the period, Sarah conducted a normal lesson about character development in literature. Students participated actively, asking questions and engaging with the material in ways she hadn't seen before. The removal of Tank's intimidating presence had freed them to learn, but Sarah knew this was temporary. Vincent's visit had been a reconnaissance mission, and his assessment would determine what came next. She had passed some kind of test by not backing down, but she had also escalated herself from nuisance to legitimate threat. After class, Maria approached her desk with obvious concern. "Ms. Mitchell, you need to be careful. Vincent Williams is not like Tank. Tank is just a bully, but Vincent has really hurt people. My cousin knows someone who crossed Vincent last year, and they ended up in the hospital." "What happened?" "Vincent didn't do it himself. He has friends who handle things for him. People who make problems disappear." The warning chilled Sarah more than Vincent's direct threats had. She was no longer dealing with teenage posturing but with adult criminals who operated outside school authority. Her phone buzzed with a new text from the same unknown number as before. "Nice meeting you today. Hope we can be friends. Friends look out for each other. Enemies ... Well, accidents happen." Sarah stared at the message, realizing that everything up to this point had been preliminary skirmishes. The real war was about to begin, and the battlefield would extend far beyond the walls of Lincoln West High School She thought about Detective Reeves' card in her wallet, about calling for help before this spiraled completely out of control. But she also thought about Maria and the other students who deserved better, about her own refusal to let bullies win through intimidation. Sarah Mitchell had faced enemy combatants in Afghanistan and professional fighters in the ring. Now she was about to face something potentially more dangerous: criminals who used a high school as their base of operations and viewed education as a threat to their power. The stakes had just gotten much higher. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected development that would reshape the entire conflict. Sarah arrived at school to find a news van parked outside the main entrance and a reporter interviewing students about escalating violence and intimidation at Lincoln West High School. Principal Hawkins was pacing in her office when Sarah knocked on the door. Channel 7 received an anonymous tip about systematic harassment of teachers, Hawkins explained, gesturing toward the window where the news crew was setting up equipment. They're planning a feature story about failing urban schools and the breakdown of authority. Did Vincent orchestrate this? That's what I thought initially, but the reporter mentioned specific details about insurance violations and contractor irregularities. Someone with inside knowledge fed them information that goes beyond what Vincent would know. Sarah realized Mrs. Jackson had escalated their private investigation into a public relations war. The veteran teacher was using media pressure to force the school board's hand on Vincent's cleaning contract and Tank's crew's behavior. The school board is meeting in an emergency session this afternoon, Hawkins continued. They want answers about security breaches, teacher retention, and the Williams family's influence on school operations. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Jackson. Check Channel 7 website. Time to apply maximum pressure. The news station's website featured a detailed investigative report titled Lincoln West High: When Criminals Control Classrooms. The article connected Vincent's cleaning service to school security failures, documented the pattern of teacher harassment, and included interviews with former teachers who had quit after intimidation campaigns. Most damaging was a sidebar story about Robert Williams, construction contracts with the district, and how his son's behavioral problems had been overlooked due to political connections. The article painted a picture of systemic corruption that went far beyond teenage bullying. Sarah's phone rang immediately after she finished reading. Ms. Mitchell? This is Councilwoman Patricia Foster. I chair the City Council's Education Oversight Committee, and I'd like to speak with you about the situation at Lincoln West. Councilwoman Foster was a formidable African-American woman in her 50s who had built her political career on education reform and anti-corruption efforts. Her involvement meant the conflict had reached the highest levels of local government. I've been monitoring the Williams family's influence in our school district for 2 years, Foster explained during their phone conversation. But I needed documentation and witness testimony to build a case. Your situation has provided both. What kind of case? Contract fraud, misuse of public resources, and conspiracy to obstruct education. Vincent Williams' cleaning service has been systematically compromising school security to facilitate intimidation campaigns. Robert Williams has used his construction contracts to pressure school administrators into protecting his son's disruptive behavior. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. What do you need from me? Testimony before the school board this afternoon, and willingness to cooperate with a formal investigation. But I want you to understand the risks. The Williams family won't go quietly, and they have resources we're still discovering. Before Sarah could respond, her sister, Emma, called with urgent news. Sarah, something weird happened at work yesterday. 2 men in suits showed up asking questions about you. They claimed to be from some kind of background check company, but my supervisor thought they seemed suspicious. The investigation was expanding in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. She realized that while she had been focused on school-based confrontations, Vincent had been conducting a comprehensive background investigation to find additional leverage points. What kind of questions? About your military service, your finances, your relationships. They seemed particularly interested in your medical history and any legal problems you might have had. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. In Afghanistan, enemy intelligence operations had followed similar patterns: gather personal information, identify vulnerabilities, then exploit them through targeted pressure campaigns. Emma, I need you to document everything about these contacts: names, appearance, questions asked, business cards if they gave any. This is part of something bigger. After ending the call, Sarah realized the scope of Vincent's operation. He wasn't just targeting her job, he was conducting systematic intelligence gathering to destroy her reputation and financial stability. This was the kind of comprehensive warfare that required equal preparation to counter. She called her former military unit commander, Colonel James Rodriguez, who now worked for a private security consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Sarah Mitchell. Colonel Rodriguez answered warmly. Haven't heard from you since your discharge. How's civilian life treating you? It's complicated, sir. I need some advice about a situation involving organized intimidation and possibly illegal surveillance. Sarah outlined the conflict at Lincoln West, emphasizing the systematic nature of Vincent's operations and the expansion beyond school grounds. Colonel Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally asking tactical questions that reminded Sarah why she had respected his leadership. What you're describing sounds like organized crime methodology, Colonel Rodriguez said finally. Professional surveillance, systematic intimidation, economic pressure campaigns. This Vincent Williams either has training we don't know about, or he's working with people who do. Any suggestions for countermeasures? Document everything. Establish secure communications with allies and prepare for escalation. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. I still have contacts in law enforcement intelligence. Would you like me to run Vincent Williams through federal databases? Is that legal? It's a gray area, but if he's conducting organized criminal operations, there might be existing investigations you could coordinate with. Sometimes the best defense is discovering you're not fighting alone. Colonel Rodriguez promised to make discreet inquiries and report back within 24 hours. Meanwhile, Sarah needed to prepare for the school board meeting that afternoon. Mrs. Jackson provided crucial support, arriving at Sarah's apartment that evening with boxes of documentation spanning 3 years of Williams' family influence operations. This isn't just about Tank's classroom behavior, Mrs. Jackson explained, spreading files across Sarah's kitchen table. The Williams family has been systematically corrupting the entire district. Robert's construction company gets no bid contracts. Vincent's cleaning service has access to buildings after hours, and Tank gets protection from disciplinary action. The documentation was extensive. Financial records showing unusual payment patterns, incident reports that had been buried or modified, teacher resignation letters citing identical intimidation tactics, and correspondence between Robert Williams and school board members that suggested improper influence. How did you gather all this? 43 years of teaching creates a lot of relationships, Mrs. Jackson smiled. Former students working in administration, teachers who kept private records, maintenance staff who noticed things. When you stay in one place long enough, people trust you with information. Sarah studied a pattern of teacher resignations that went back 18 months. 7 teachers had quit Lincoln West citing harassment, intimidation, or unsafe working conditions. All had been replaced by long-term substitutes who were either ineffective or quickly driven out by Tank's crew. This is systematic destruction of education quality, Sarah realized. Exactly. Tank's crew doesn't just want to avoid learning. They want to prevent anyone else from learning. It gives them control over students who might otherwise challenge their authority. Mrs. Jackson pulled out a final folder marked Phase 3. Inside were documents suggesting the Williams family's influence extended to other schools in the district. Tank has 2 younger siblings in middle school, Mrs. Jackson explained. Early reports suggest they're beginning similar patterns of intimidation. This isn't just about one high school. It's about establishing generational control over the entire education system in this neighborhood. The scope of the problem was staggering, but it also meant Sarah's fight had broader significance. She wasn't just defending her classroom or her students. She was potentially breaking the cycle of educational sabotage that could affect hundreds of children over the coming years. Wednesday morning brought the school board meeting that would determine the immediate future of Lincoln West High School. Sarah arrived early to find the meeting room packed with community members, teachers, parents, and journalists. The controversy had drawn attention from across the city. Councilwoman Foster approached Sarah before the meeting began. "I have some information from my federal contacts," Foster said quietly. "Vincent Williams has been under FBI surveillance for 6 months as part of a broader investigation into municipal corruption. Your situation has provided them with evidence they needed about his methods. Does that change anything for today?" "It means whatever happens here, Vincent's larger operation is going to be dismantled. But it also means he's desperate, which makes him more dangerous in the short term." The school board meeting began with Superintendent Michael Brennan reading a prepared statement about recent allegations and the district's commitment to thorough investigation. But the real drama began when parents started testifying about their children's experiences. Maria's mother, Carmen Rodriguez, spoke first. "My daughter comes home crying because she's afraid to participate in class. She wants to learn, but these boys make school a place of fear instead of education." Ashley Chun's father described how his daughter had witnessed drug transactions in school bathrooms and felt unable to report them due to fear of retaliation. Tyler Morrison's parents explained how their son had developed anxiety and depression due to constant bullying, and how teachers seemed powerless to protect students who wanted to learn. The testimony painted a picture of systematic educational failure that went far beyond normal disciplinary problems. When Sarah's turn came to speak, she had a clear understanding of her role in a much larger battle. "I'm not here to complain about difficult students," Sarah began, addressing the school board directly. "I'm here to expose a criminal conspiracy that uses intimidation and violence to prevent education from happening." She outlined Vincent's surveillance operations, the systematic destruction of her classroom, threats against her family, and the pattern of driving out effective teachers. But most importantly, she connected these tactics to their impact on students like Maria, who deserved better. "The Williams family has turned Lincoln West High School into their personal territory," Sarah concluded. "They've created a system where learning is punished and ignorance is rewarded. This isn't about disciplinary policy, it's about whether we'll allow criminals to control our children's futures." The school board voted unanimously to terminate Vincent's cleaning contract, launch a formal investigation into Robert Williams' construction contracts, and implement immediate security measures to protect teachers and students from intimidation. But as Sarah left the meeting, she received a text that reminded her the real battle was just beginning. "Congratulations on your little victory. Now let's see how you handle the consequences." Vincent Williams was not the type of man who accepted defeat quietly, and Sarah realized she had just escalated their conflict to a level where the rules of engagement would be completely different. Colonel Rodriguez called that evening with disturbing news from his federal contacts. "Vincent Williams isn't just a local criminal," Rodriguez reported. "He's connected to a regional network involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and political corruption. Your school situation was small scale compared to his other operations. What does that mean for me? It means he has resources and connections we didn't anticipate. But it also means federal authorities are very interested in using your situation as leverage against his larger operation." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility shifting again. She had started this fight to protect her students and maintain her job. Now she was apparently a key witness in a federal investigation that could dismantle a criminal network. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "Vincent's associates include people with military and law enforcement backgrounds. Former soldiers who went in the wrong direction after discharge. They understand tactics and have access to equipment that makes them more dangerous than typical street criminals." The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Vincent Williams wasn't just Tank's older brother. He was a sophisticated criminal operator who had built a network of corrupted veterans and ex-law enforcement personnel. Sarah's military background and refusal to be intimidated had threatened not just his school-based operations, but his entire local power structure. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah checked the security system she had installed in her apartment and verified that Detective Reeves had arranged increased patrol coverage for Emma's workplace and residence. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. And Sarah suspected Vincent. Williams would use every resource at his disposal to eliminate the threat she represented to his criminal empire. But Sarah Mitchell had faced overwhelming odds before, and she had never retreated when innocent people needed protection. Lincoln West High School was about to become the battlefield for a war that would determine whether criminals or educators controlled the future of inner-city education. The stakes had never been higher, and the fight was about to reach its climax. Thursday morning dawned with an ominous stillness that Sarah recognized from her combat days, the calm before decisive action. She arrived at Lincoln West to find the school transformed. New security personnel were stationed at every entrance. Teachers carried themselves with renewed confidence, and students moved through hallways with a different energy. Principal Hawkins briefed Sarah on overnight developments. Vincent Williams' cleaning service had their building access terminated at midnight. Federal agents served warrants on 3 Williams family properties at dawn. And Robert Williams has been suspended from the city council pending investigation. What about Tank and his crew? That's the interesting part. Tank hasn't been seen since yesterday evening. Neither have Diesel or Little Mac. Only Chloe showed up, and she's been unusually quiet. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Vincent's official power structure was crumbling, but desperate criminals often became more dangerous when cornered. First through fourth periods proceeded with unprecedented normalcy. Students participated actively in lessons, teachers moved freely through hallways, and the atmosphere of fear that had dominated Lincoln West for months was visibly lifting. But the fifth period would bring the final test. Chloe entered room 218. Alone, her usual defiant energy replaced by something Sarah couldn't immediately identify. The remaining seats filled with students who belonged in the class, some participating for the first time all semester. "Where's Tank?" Sarah asked directly. Chloe looked up from her desk with exhausted eyes. "Gone, him and the others. Vincent told them to lay low until this blows over." "And you stayed?" "I got nowhere else to go." Chloe's voice carried a vulnerability Sarah had never heard before. "My parents found out about the crew's activities. They think I'm throwing my life away for some losers who don't care about anything." Sarah studied Chloe carefully. The girl who had spent weeks trying to intimidate her was revealing cracks in the facade that suggested something more complex underneath. "Your parents are probably right," Sarah said. "But that doesn't mean it's too late to change direction. You don't understand. Tank's crew was like family. We protected each other." "From what?" Chloe was quiet for a long moment. "From feeling invisible. From being just another kid in a school where nothing matters. When you're with Tank, people notice you. People respect you." Sarah nodded, understanding the appeal of belonging to something powerful. "What kind of respect did you actually have?" "Fear isn't the same as respect. It felt real at the time." The conversation was interrupted by commotion in the hallway. Through the classroom window, Sarah saw several unmarked vehicles pulling into the school parking lot. Federal agents in tactical gear were positioning themselves around the building. Her phone rang immediately. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Agent Catherine Walsh with the FBI. We have information that Vincent Williams may attempt to target the school today. We're implementing immediate lockdown procedures." The lockdown alarm sounded throughout the building as Sarah absorbed the gravity of the situation. Vincent's criminal network was making a desperate play, and Lincoln West High School had become the battlefield. What should I do with my students? Keep them calm and away from windows. We have teams in position, but this could take several hours to resolve. Sarah addressed her class with military precision. We're going into lockdown for safety reasons. I need everyone to move to the interior wall and remain quiet. Maria raised her hand tentatively. Ms. Mitchell, is this because of what happened at the school board meeting? It's because adults are taking responsibility for problems they should have addressed years ago, Sarah replied. Today is about making sure Lincoln West becomes safe for everyone, Chloe spoke up unexpectedly. Vincent's really dangerous when he's cornered. He's not going to just disappear because the FBI wants him to. What do you know about his plans? Tank mentioned something about making a statement if their operations got shut down. Vincent has military friends who think the school system disrespected them. Sarah felt ice in her veins. If Vincent's associates included corrupted veterans with tactical training, this lockdown could become a prolonged siege situation. She called Agent Walsh back immediately. One of my students says Vincent has military-trained associates who may be planning to make a statement at the school. We're aware of the possibility. Vincent Williams has connections to a group called the Detroit Liberation Front, former military and law enforcement personnel involved in various criminal activities. We've been tracking them for months. What's their capability? Significant. Former Army Rangers, discharged police officers, private security contractors. They have training, equipment, and nothing to lose. The situation had escalated far beyond Sarah's original classroom confrontation. She was now at the center of a federal operation to neutralize a domestic terrorism threat. An hour into the lockdown, movement outside caught Sarah's attention. 3 men in tactical gear were approaching the school's main entrance, but they weren't federal agents. Their equipment was military-grade, but mismatched, and their movement pattern suggested they were operating without official coordination. Sarah's phone buzzed, with a text from an unknown number. This is what happens when teachers don't know their place. 1 hour to evacuate the building, or we demonstrate what real authority looks like. Vincent Williams was making his final play, using the threat of violence against students and teachers to force the federal investigation to back down. Agent Walsh called immediately after Sarah forwarded the message. We're not evacuating, Walsh said firmly. Vincent's making empty threats because he knows we have him surrounded. But I need you to keep your students calm while we resolve this. Agent Walsh, I have military training. If this becomes a combat situation, I can assist. Absolutely not. You're a civilian teacher, not a federal agent. Your job is to protect those students. But Sarah had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes protecting people required more than hiding behind walls. She turned to her class, which included Maria, Chloe, and 15 other students whose education had been held hostage by Vincent's criminal operation. I want everyone to understand what's happening outside, Sarah said. Some very bad people are trying to use fear and violence to control this school. But they're going to fail because good people with proper training are going to stop them. What if they get inside? Asked Tyler, the freshman who had been bullied by Diesel. Then they'll have to deal with me, Sarah replied. And I promise you, they're not prepared for that. Chloe looked at Sarah with new understanding. You're really not afraid of them, are you? I'm afraid for you and every other student whose education has been stolen by these criminals. But I'm not afraid of Vincent Williams or his friends. The intercom crackled with Principal Hawkins' voice. All students and staff remain in secure positions. Law enforcement is handling a situation outside the building. You are safe. But Sarah knew from experience that safety was something you created, not something others provided. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Colonel Rodriguez. "Sarah, I'm monitoring federal communications about your situation. Vincent Williams and 2 associates have barricaded themselves in a building across from the school. They're making demands about teacher transfers and investigation termination. What are the chances this ends peacefully?" Low. Vincent's facing federal charges that could put him away for life. His associates are wanted on multiple warrants. They're going to fight rather than surrender. What about my students? The FBI is good at what they do, but you know as well as I do that sometimes things go wrong. Be ready for anything. Sarah looked at her students, 17 young people whose futures hung in the balance of this confrontation. Maria, who wanted nothing more than to learn literature. Tyler, who needed protection from bullies. Even Chloe, who was discovering that respect couldn't be built on fear. "Ms. Mitchell," Chloe said quietly, "if something happens, I want you to know that Tank's crew wasn't all bad. We just didn't know how to be good. None of this is your fault, Chloe. You got caught up in something bigger than teenage rebellion. But I could have made different choices. We all could have." The admission represented a transformation that Sarah had hoped for but never expected. Chloe was recognizing that education offered something more valuable than the temporary power of intimidation. 2 hours into the lockdown, Agent Walsh called with an update. "Vincent Williams is demanding to speak with you specifically. He claims this is all about personal disrespect, not criminal activity." What does that mean? It means he's delusional. But he might be willing to surrender if he feels like he's saving face. Would you be willing to speak with him by phone? Sarah considered the request. Vincent had orchestrated months of systematic intimidation, threatened her family, and now was holding her school hostage. But if talking to him could end this without violence, she had an obligation to try. Put him through. Vincent's voice came across the line with the strained quality of someone under extreme stress. "Ms. Mitchell, the famous Marine teacher who thinks she can change the world. Vincent, this needs to end. Your brother and his friends have already left. Your father's political career is over. Your criminal network is dismantled. What's the point of continuing? The point is respect. You disrespected my family, my authority, my territory. That has consequences. Your authority was built on fear and violence. That's not respect. That's terrorism. You think your military service makes you special? I got news for you. Some of us served too, and we learned different lessons." Sarah realized Vincent's core issue wasn't about Tank's education or school control. It was about a corrupted veteran who felt society had failed him, and he was taking revenge on institutions that represented order and progress. "What lessons did you learn, Vincent?" "That the system doesn't work. That good people get screwed while politicians and bureaucrats get rich. That sometimes you have to take what you want because nobody's going to give it to you. So you decided to steal education from children? That's your solution?" "I decided to build something real. Something where loyalty mattered and strength counted for something. You built a criminal organization that preys on teenagers and destroys communities." Vincent was quiet for several seconds. "Maybe, but at least I built something." Sarah heard the desperation in his voice and realized Vincent Williams was a broken man who had chosen destruction over healing. No amount of conversation would change his fundamental worldview. "Vincent, this is your chance to surrender and face justice through the legal system. Don't make this worse than it already is." "Justice?" Vincent laughed bitterly. "Justice is what happens when I decide who gets to teach and who gets to learn. In my neighborhood." The call ended abruptly, and Agent Walsh came back on the line immediately. "Vincent just rejected our final surrender ultimatum. Federal tactical teams are moving in now. Through the classroom window, Sarah could see movement across the street as black-clad figures approached the building where Vincent had barricaded himself. The confrontation that had started months ago with teenage classroom disruption was about to end with federal agents taking down a domestic terrorism cell. The resolution came swiftly but not quietly. Flashbang grenades lit up the afternoon sky, followed by sustained bursts of automatic weapons fire that lasted less than 30 seconds. Then silence. Agent Walsh called back within minutes. Vincent Williams and his 2 associates are in custody. No law enforcement casualties. The threat to Lincoln West High School has been eliminated. Sarah felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and triumph. Vincent Williams had chosen violence and criminality, but his reign of terror over the school was finally over. The lockdown was lifted an hour later, and students were reunited with their families in the school gymnasium. As Sarah watched emotional reunions between parents and children, she reflected on how this crisis had revealed both the worst and best of human nature. Maria approached her as the crowd was thinning. "Miss Mitchell, what happens now? Is Tank coming back?" "Tank will have to answer for his choices just like his brother did. But what happens now is up to you and students like you." "What do you mean?" "You get to learn without fear. You get to participate in class without intimidation. You get to become everything you're capable of becoming." Maria smiled through tears of relief. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Chloe was the last student to leave, approaching Sarah with obvious nervousness. "Ms. Mitchell, I want to apologize for everything I did. For the disruptions, the intimidation, all of it." "Apology accepted, Chloe. But what matters now is what you do next." "I want to actually learn. Maybe catch up on what I missed while I was playing tough girl. Then we'll start tomorrow with a clean slate." 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of room 218, now renovated and equipped with new technology, preparing for another day of teaching. Tank Williams had been transferred to a juvenile facility for counseling and education. Diesel had been expelled but was enrolled in an alternative program focused on anger management and life skills. Little Mac was attending regular therapy sessions while remaining at Lincoln West under strict behavioral contracts. Vincent Williams and his associates had been sentenced to federal prison terms ranging from 15 to 25 years. Robert Williams had resigned from the city council and was facing corruption charges that would likely end his political career. But the real victory was in the classroom. Transformation Sarah witnessed every day. Students like Maria were excelling academically and considering college applications. Tyler had joined the debate team and was developing confidence in public speaking. Even Chloe had become one of Sarah's most engaged students, working to bring her grades up while mentoring younger students about the dangers of intimidation and violence. Principal Hawkins had offered Sarah a permanent teaching position, which she had accepted. Her knee had healed sufficiently to return to fighting if she chose, but Sarah had discovered that education was its own form of combat, one where victories created lasting change. Instead of temporary dominance. Mrs. Jackson stopped by Sarah's classroom that afternoon with news that 3 other schools in the district had requested her consultation on dealing with systematic intimidation problems. The success at Lincoln West had become a model for transforming education environments where criminals had gained control. "You did something important here," Mrs. Jackson said. "You proved that one person with courage and competence can change an entire system. I had help, a lot of help. True, but you were willing to stand up when it mattered most." As Sarah prepared lessons for the next day, she reflected on the journey from substitute teacher to federal witness to permanent educator. She had faced enemy combatants in Afghanistan, professional fighters in the ring, and criminal organizations in Detroit classrooms. But her greatest victory was sitting in front of her, in the form of lesson plans designed to help students discover their potential. Critical thinking exercises that would prepare them for college and careers. and writing assignments that encouraged them to imagine better futures for themselves and their communities. Sarah Mitchell had proven that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or fists, but with determination to ensure that education triumphs over intimidation, that learning defeats ignorance, and that one teacher's refusal to surrender can transform an entire school. Lincoln West High School was no longer a place where criminals controlled the future. It had become what schools were meant to be, a place where young people could discover who they were capable of becoming. The war was over. Education had won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.